My name is Amy, and I am about to tell you a story that I probably should never share. I am a 45-year-old woman in the darkest period of my life. Years of marriage followed by a divorce, and those long months when I lost all faith in myself. The reflection in the mirror felt like a stranger standing in front of the mirror in my underwear. I would think, why would anyone desire you? The people who once told me I was beautiful had fallen silent. I had forgotten myself. Perhaps thinking back, I had lost myself. I wasn't going out. Wealth had given me only a desolate corner of solitude. I would like to invite you to subscribe to our channel. And like our videos, every click of yours is valuable to us, as it gives us more motivation to continue sharing more meaningful stories with you. If you like our content, we encourage you to share and leave questions below. Every interaction is a way to build a closer and more connected community. And I invite you to stay with us until the end of the video. I am very grateful to you. Then came Slatter, no matter how much I tried to resist him. Despite the 25 years between us, he somehow managed to reach the deepest parts of me. I could feel the warmth radiating from him. And before I knew it, I found myself in his arms, unable to resist the pull, when a new neighbor moved in. I had no idea that this young man would turn my life upside down. The first time I saw him, he was walking down the sidewalk wearing ripped jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and a smile that could light up any room he was in. His early 20s full of life and carefree. I watched him from behind the curtains of my window, never imagining the whirlwind that was about to stir between us. It was Slatter who made the first move, but it wasn't your typical introduction. There was no polite hello, no tentative small talk. His approach was bold, direct, and occasionally cheeky in a way that made me both uneasy and intrigued. One morning I opened the door to find him standing, on my porch, a cup of coffee in hand, looking every bit. "The confident stranger Amy," he said, his voice rich with self-assurance. "Since this place seems so dull, I've decided to make it my mission to whisk you away from here." The confidence in his tone left me momentarily speechless. "I don't think we've met," I managed to say, trying to play it cool, but he just shrugged, that mischievous grin never leaving his face. "Well, everything has a beginning," he replied. "You could start by inviting me in for coffee. We'll discuss the rest in your bedroom." His boldness left me stunned, a mix of discomfort and curiosity, settling in, despite the growing temptation to entertain his audacity. I didn't invite him in. "Thank you," I said, trying to dismiss the situation. But before I could close the door, he spoke again. "Amy," he said, his voice laced with challenge. "When was the last time you had an adventure?" He took a slow sip of his coffee, eyes never leaving mine. "If you can't answer, then that's the problem." I tried to brush him off, but Slatter wasn't one to be easily dismissed. He wasn't one to take no for an answer, and soon he found more ways to challenge me one day. While wandering through my garden, he caught me off guard again. "Amy," he asked, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "When you look at these flowers, what do you see? Wilted leaves in need of care, or the splendor waiting for spring to awaken?" His words stirred something deep inside me, though they unsettled me just the same. "Slatter," I responded, a smirk playing on my lips. "People your age don't usually talk like this." But he leaned in closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "People my age usually talk nonsense, but I'd rather spend my time wisely with someone who's worth it." With each passing day, these conversations became more frequent, but what Slatter said was never mere flirtation. It was a deliberate effort to push me beyond the boundaries I had carefully constructed around myself. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze punctuated the silence between us. After a while, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression and asked, "Amy, why do you always seem to have everything under control? Have you ever tried letting go, truly losing yourself? I mean, Have you ever stripped away all the layers and swam in the sea at midnight, or been with the person your heart truly craved without hesitation? I met his gaze, trying to read him, and replied, "Slatter, you're still young. There are things you simply don't understand. Losing control isn't always a good idea." I challenged him with my eyes, daring him to respond. But instead of backing down, he flashed that mischievous smile that always seemed to provoke me. "No, Amy," he said, leaning in slightly. "I think the real issue is that you've never really found yourself. Maybe that's what I can help you with. Let me show you." His audacity stirred something inside me, a mix of anger and intrigue. His words were bold, and for reasons I couldn't quite explain, they unsettled me the following day. He appeared at my porch again. This time he claimed he needed advice about his new house, but I knew better. The conversation quickly veered toward familiar ground. Amy. He began leaning closer across the table, his eyes scanning mine with unsettling clarity. "I see it in your eyes. There's still that fire, that passion of youth, but you locked it away so tightly that you've forgotten where you hid the key." His words struck me deeply, a cocktail of embarrassment and irritation rising in my chest with a forced bravado. I responded, "Slatter, does this persistent act usually get you anywhere?" His smile was knowing, almost as though he'd been waiting for me to ask. "It's not persistence, Amy," he said softly, his tone shifting to something deeper. "I'm just trying to show you the truth. I want to help you awaken the fire you've buried inside the one you've forgotten about." And despite myself, his words began to break through the barriers I had built around myself. He had a way of seeing through me that no one else did. The next time he came by, I sat on my porch sipping tea, trying to maintain the calm I had so carefully crafted. He came closer, standing just at the edge of my space, his eyes intense and searching Amy. He said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "If you trust me just this once and let go of all your reservations, I'll make you experience things you never even dreamed of." His words weren't merely an invitation. They were a challenge, and I could feel the weight of it in the air between us for a moment. I hesitated, my heart racing with the uncertainty of it all. But in his eyes, I saw something raw, something honest, and I knew that there was no turning back. The dangers of getting too close to him were clear, but the magnetic pull of those dangers was stronger. "All right, Slatter," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What do you suggest at that moment?" Slatter leaned in closer, his breath warm against my ear as he whispered, "Just go with the flow. Amy, control is your greatest enemy." His words echoed in my mind, and something inside me shifted that night. For the first time, I surrendered. I allowed myself to let go of the tight grip I always held on my life, my thoughts, and my actions. We walked for hours through the rain, each step a release, as our clothes became drenched, clinging to us with every drop I was wearing. A white shirt, and by the time we had walked for a while, it had become see-through, revealing more of me than I had ever intended. But in that moment, I didn't care. There was something in Slatter's eyes, a wildness, a fire that I couldn't look away from. He was so intense, his presence consuming, and his words held a power that rattled me to the core. "Amy," he said suddenly, his voice a low growl. "A woman like you doesn't deserve a normal life. You carry volcanoes in your heart, and I want to watch them erupt." The words pierced me, breaking down the walls I had so carefully built around myself. For years I had always been so guarded, so cautious, but in his presence all of that crumbled away. Our closeness was instant, as if the rain had washed away any remaining distance between us. I shivered from the cold, my skin prickling, but when his hands touched me, the warmth they radiated was unlike anything I had ever felt before. The gentle yet insistent way his fingertips traced along my skin sent a jolt of heat through me, a heat that burned in places I thought had long been dormant. His touch was a reminder of a part of myself I had forgotten, a part that had been buried deep inside, afraid to resurface when our eyes locked. I saw something in his gaze, something that pulled me in. There was both challenge and desire there, a longing that was almost tangible, as if he was daring me to let go. And in that moment, time seemed to slow down. Slatter's hands moved from my shoulders to my waist, with such ease that it felt as though we had always been connected. My breath caught in my throat as the space between us closed. "Amy," he said, his voice softer now, almost tender. "Stop doing this to yourself. Stop fighting with yourself, and just feel." His words were a quiet command, an invitation to surrender a part of me wanted to pull back, to retreat into the safety of my own control. But another part of me, the part that had been hiding all this time, urged me to take the leap. And so I did. I stopped holding back the distance between us, disappeared in an instant, and in that moment, nothing mattered but the intensity of what was happening between us. We stripped away the layers, the emotional armor we had built around ourselves, and stood bare before each other, exposed and vulnerable. When his lips touched mine for the first time, it was as if all the chaw inside me evaporated for a fleeting moment. I lost myself completely in him. The wildness of his touch, the assertiveness in his every movement made me feel something strange and exhilarating, and I welcomed it. After what felt like an eternity, our kiss deepened, and I felt something I hadn't in years, a rush of sensation, a rawness that came from deep within the volcano inside me, erupted slowly, but with an intensity I had never known. It was overwhelming, like a flood of pleasure that surged through every part of me, igniting everything it touched. I hadn't felt anything like it in so long. In that moment, I felt alive, in a way I never had before. When he attempted to pull away, I clung to him, wrapping myself even tighter in his embrace, refusing to let go. Despite the sharp thorns that pressed against my back, what I felt in that moment was something I had longed for, a longing that had lived within me for years. It wasn't just passion I experienced that night. It was something deeper. For the first time, I understood what freedom truly meant. What Slatter offered me wasn't just a relationship. It was a profound opportunity to rediscover who I was, to shed the layers of doubt and uncertainty I had carried for so long. Every touch, every word reshaped me, rewrote the way I saw myself the time I spent with him, pushed me further than I ever thought I could go. And I realized this was just the beginning of something much more significant. After that night, our connection transformed into something almost like a marriage, but with an intensity that transcended anything I had ever known. Slatter made me feel as if I were forever youthful, always fresh, as if I were a 20-year-old woman. Again, full of energy and potential, he treated me with such care and attention. Whether we were in public, at home, in the kitchen, lounging in the living room, or most profoundly in bed, each touch, each word, continued to redefine me. Breaking down walls I didn't even know I had every moment with him stretched my limits, took me to places I hadn't imagined, and I thought to myself, this was only the start. I believed that we were destined for wild, unforgettable days ahead, moments that would be etched into our memories forever. However, the intense bond we shared quickly became the talk of the neighborhood, and while I could feel the discomfort creeping in, Slatter seemed completely unfazed by it all. Oddly, what unsettled me the most was the thought of my ex-husband, the man who had left me and caused irreparable damage to my life, finding out about this new chapter. In some way, I feared he would hear of my new connection. Even though I tried not to admit it to myself, this underlying fear buried deep within me didn't go unnoticed. Slatter began to sense it, and his behavior toward me subtly shifted. It wasn't that he treated me poorly, but something had changed. I no longer felt like the passionate, cherished woman he had once fallen for. Instead, I felt as though I was merely a body to be satisfied. A flesh and blood entity he sought to fill every night. The gentleness, the affection, the romance that had once defined our relationship seemed to dissipate in its place. There was only roughness, urgency, and an almost clinical desire to claim me. It was fast-fiery and lacking the tenderness that had once made everything feel so deeply meaningful. I was still feeling moments of pleasure, but there was an overwhelming sense of fear that lingered beneath the surface every morning. I woke up to find 5 distinct finger-shaped marks imprinted on my skin. The marks seemed like an unsettling reminder of what I had experienced the night before. On top of that, the exhaustion from our encounters left me struggling to walk. In the days that followed one evening after coming home early from work, I found something that shook me to my core. A young woman in my house, she was wearing my clothes. And to make matters worse, she was with Slatter. The sight of them together was like a slap in the face in a flash of fury. I stormed into the house, unable to contain my anger, and we erupted into a heated confrontation, both of us yelling at each other in an ugly exchange. At one point, Slatter, unable to hold back any longer, shouted something that struck me deeply. "Do you even care about me? You're still thinking about your ex-husband. You still miss him. So I take my revenge like this." It was then that I realized just how much my past had affected him. I hadn't truly understood the weight of it until he spoke those words that night. We didn't just argue. We finally confronted the emotions that had been simmering beneath the surface. I felt the intensity build between us again, almost like a volcano erupting with the same force as it did on the very first night. From that moment on, things began to shift. There was an undeniable transparency in our relationship, but there was one change that stood above all the rest. I admitted to him that despite everything, I seemed to enjoy what he was giving me. His presence, his intensity, and everything that came with it. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Before we say goodbye, if you have not yet subscribed, I invite you to press the subscribe button. Your support, even if it seems like a small gesture, means a lot to us and drives us to continue creating content with heart. Don't forget to give it a like. If you liked what we shared today, as every interaction helps us grow and allows us to continue connecting with you through stories that matter. Thank you for being part of this community.